Hello, everybody. I'm Candid Frank. On the far right is David Morassutti, and some guy in the middle that you've probably seen once in a while if you like watching Canadian Football League. Glen Suitor is his name. Glenn, first of all, always thank you for taking the time to join us. And you just got off an airplane, so you're really dedicated to talk to two guys about the Canadian Football League and football in general, too, sometimes.
Yeah, anytime we can talk football, I love it. So I'm happy to be here, happy to be part of the show, and yeah, I know we got a lot to get to.
Yeah, I got to tell you, David, it's been for us, for David and I, people come up to me and or talk to me on Messenger. They message me, they talk to me, and they say, "So Frank, how disappointed are you that the Argos didn't make the playoffs?" And I go, "I'm very disappointed because now everything I do becomes less relevant." And that's the simple truth. I wish I could sit there and say, "Yes, I'm a fan and I'm really horrified by what's going on." No, it's the relevance that David and I are trying to share with people that I miss.
Yeah, no,
Well,
I mean,
when you
go
look
ahead.
at, I was just going to say, David, when you look at the Argos and their season, right around the middle part of their season, there were two or three games that could have gone either way that they didn't win. Games probably that they should have won that would have put them right back in the playoff mix. I mean, Edmonton basically can say the same thing. I mean, they
Yeah.
lost by two walk-off field goals to Hamilton and Toronto. They win those two games and they're in the fight for the playoffs. So that's how tight the margins are right now.
Has there really, when you look at, I mean, the West, once again, it kind of just goes to show just how difficult that division is. But like to see the amount of competition, Toronto, obviously, they had some close games, but obviously the record is what the record is, and the same with Ottawa. But like to see, especially in the West, to have that much of a close gap between the teams below Saskatchewan, like it must bring out like kind of the best to see the league have that parity in a lot of ways.
Well, I think it does. I mean, if you're a gambler, you love being on the edge of your seat. That's what the whole excitement behind gambling is, and that's a big part of sports now, as you guys know. But I think the average fan just going to games when all of these games, and we're talking probably upwards of 65% of our games are being decided in the final 3 minutes. I mean, I've said for years, and people kind of think that I'm just trying to always promote and protect the league, but I'll tell you when I don't like it either as well. But I've said for years that the final 3 minutes in Canadian football are the best final 3 minutes in any sport in the world. I just think the rules allow for a wide open. You can come back from two possessions down. Sometimes I've even seen three possessions down and still win the game. And you can't do that in almost any other sport.
I have to say I concur and I agree, but I've also strangely and I do kind of look at some my head goes like that, and somebody says to me, "I'm tired of the all the touchdowns at the end of the game," and I shake my head. And what's the problem with that? I don't get it. Why don't you like that? And it comes down to a very simple. I don't understand it. That it's this defensive idea that some people have that love defense so well or so much, I should say, that anything that makes defense look bad is not really their kind of game. And Glenn, there are people that love defense and there are people that love offense, but you're speaking to the excitement of being on the edge of your seat, not knowing how the game is going to end. But, and this is what I said to him, I said, but because the game is that 3 minutes is so specially used, like so well used, there are defensive plays that end a game too. They're not just
Mhm.
offensive games. Just because there are points on the board doesn't mean it was the offense. So pay a little more attention. Enjoy the fact that the game has its turns.
Well, Frank, to that point, when you are down three possessions, so three possessions meaning it could be as much as 20 points, 21 points down. and you're hitting the 3-minute warning, in order to come back, and we've seen it many times in our league, in order to come back from that, you need your defense to make two, maybe three 2-and-out stops. So in order to get the ball back in those 3 minutes, and in enough, for the extra possessions, you have to have your defense make those plays. So it again, the rules are set up, and the timing of the final 3 minutes and the timeouts and how they're used. It's set up so that it's possible to come back from two possessions, and not only miracle type comebacks, but a regular basis. You have to play, if you got a two possession lead, you have to play your best football in the final 2 minutes, right down to that last few ticks of the clock. Because if you don't, you're going to give up the lead and you're going to lose.
That not to bring the complete rules conversation in, David. That's why to Glenn's point. That's why some people are afraid of the clock. That they don't want to end up like in the NFL, where yeah, you have three downs where you're in winning formation. That's not what CFL fans are used to.
No, and it's not so.
No.
Like obviously, it does get to a point where the game is done and teams are just gonna drain out the clock. But I always say like I can't recall how many games I've seen where there hasn't been any sort of competitive. Like there's always been some sort of competitiveness to the end, right? A reason to keep
Mhm.
fans. Obviously, there gets to a point where it's a blowout and fans are already starting to leave. But most of the time, you're sticking around because there's still just a little bit of hope that something can happen. We're always scheming. Oh, if they do this and then they do this, they could potentially try to get back in. Like constantly having those conversations because that's what the CFL rules and how the CFL game is designed allows for it. I, you're totally right, Frank. The NFL, like the one thing I hate is how, and people think that by adopting the new clock would potentially make games end faster. There are NFL games that in those final 2 minutes it takes forever because there's ways you can stop the clock even in the NFL in those regards. So like I do think just because it's more so the way that the CFL addresses the urgency and a quick 3-and-out, 2-and-out can change the complexion of the game so differently. And that's why I will always be the advocate for 3 downs. You'll never ever hear me say the CFL needs to do away with 3 downs because of what I have witnessed, throughout my time watching this league and how the 3 downs have really changed the way teams go about the end of games when they're down.
Well, there's I know, great discussion, of course, on all the rule changes, or the rule changes that are going to occur in the next couple of years. And I will say, and I've said many times, and I've said it on the air, that I have my concerns that we don't mess with the pillars of our game. And to me, 3 downs is the main pillar. Canadian content is definitely part of it. The final 3 minutes of games, and not to defend these decisions, but because I'm in a wait and see mode. I'm going to be professional. Guys, I've also been studying stoicism over the last little 4 or 5 years, and it's really helping me in these scenarios not to be afraid or worried about something that might not happen. We constantly do that as human beings. We're worried about stuff in the future that might not happen. So let's not worry about 4 downs, because that has not been proposed. It's 3 downs. It's the wide field. Canadian content not going to be touched. Um, and in the final 3 minutes, I know that the timing is part of the rule changes, but I've learned that they're going to meet in the off season with the rules committee and go over what the best way is to do that in the final 3 minutes, so that we don't change the possibility of a team coming back from two possessions down. I just think that would be one of the pillars, and I don't think you met pillar.
The rules committee. Glenn, help us out to understand completely what the rules committee and who makes up the rules committee. If I hope I'm not putting you on the spot.
Well,
I have an idea who it is.
no, you're not. Yeah, not at all. In fact, I was allowed years ago, before the pandemic, I was allowed to sit into rules committee meetings because it helped give me perspective on how these tweaks to rules would happen, how they broke it down, how they went through the process. I wasn't really allowed to give my opinion or talk much,
Hmm.
but but I was allowed to sit in and listen. So the rules committee basically made up of coaches, football people. Sometimes it'll be a coach slash GM, or in the case of like a John Huffnagel, it might even be just a GM or president. But someone that has obviously either played or coached the game, that is going to be in that committee, that is completely just thinking and focusing on field play, improving the excitement level. Sure, that's always proposed. How can we continue to tweak to make it a more exciting game, even more so than it is now? So what happens, guys, is the commissioner will walk in, and he will address the rules committee as to what he hopes they can come up with. Like, he might have a concern, for instance, and here's one of my concerns that's happening right now, is that it's that the replay center, or command center as it used to be called, is taking too long and is being too intrusive in games now. And I hope that Stuart Johnston goes into the rules committee this year and says, we have to tweak this. We fix this intrusive behavior from the replay center, because it's slowing down the pace of games. It stops it sometimes for 2 or 3 minutes, and they're making penalty calls from Toronto in games in Calgary and BC. And I just think we've overreached in that regard. And I'm hoping that the commissioner feels the same way. And that is one of the agenda items for the rules committee. So that's kind of how it breaks down. There's football people from every team that go over the different proposals, different ideas. They look at a ton of video, and then they come up with recommendations and they send those to the board.
And those are people that have experience, are big in experience in the Canadian Football League, that understand what the Canadian Football League is, and the discussion is, okay, now we're going to try something. How will that impact the way the game is? And then they
Right.
use their knowledge in the game to project which way they should move. Even to that point of Toronto getting involved in calls. When Toronto first got involved, they used to say, okay, we're involved. And then they'd start thinking. The one thing they did do that was better, Glenn, that I liked, was they were doing it before they were even asked. Now, to your point, though, they can't use too much time and they can't interfere with the game. But that was one thing they did that helps me understand that they're thinking about, let's not make this too intrusive, right? So at the end of the day, though, we all know one thing. I think most people can agree. I don't think everybody, but most people can agree we want to get to the right answer.
Yeah. But here's the other thing that I've learned, because I was a big proponent of the command center or the replay center, looking at things like pass interference, penalties like that are so punitive that can change a game. I mean, you could have an 80-yard penalty on a pass interference call. So I was a big proponent of them getting that call right. Here's the problem, though, that I've learned over the last 5 years and the evolution of the replay center. I've learned that even though the goal is a genuine one to get the call right, it is still so subjective. In other words, in a room like the rules committee, they will show a piece of video of one pass interference call, for instance, and show it from 4 or 5 different angles. And in that rules committee, that room will be split as to whether or not that was pass interference or not pass interference. So even in the rules committee, with the coaches and all that experience in there, that room is split down the middle on whether or not a certain penalty should have been called or not called. And if it's that level of subjectivity, then we're not really getting the call right. We're just bringing in other opinions to look at the call. And now they're helping us to say, well, here's the standard, here's what we think. but it's another opinion. And, you know, don't even get me started on what the fans are saying. If the passive interference is against your team, you don't think it's interference no matter what you're looking at. So, you
Absolutely.
know, I think we got to keep that. I think we got to keep that in mind, that these subjective calls, and I'm not talking about fumble or not fumble, in or out of bounds, catch or no catch. Those are pretty cut and dry. They're not really subjective. You either catch it and secure it or you don't. And but the penalties for even roughing the passer, that's a very player safety issue. But even those are becoming very subjective and in some case soft. So I think it has to be revamped. I think they have to look at it hard in the off season. I hope they reboot it and come out the other end with a sort of a different approach.
Well, I've heard you guys on TSN say some things that I agree with. I'd love to take credit for thinking it, but I'm not going to. I'm going to give credit where credit's due. And one of the big things that the announcers and the play-by-play guys and the color guys like yourself have pointed out, at some point, the slow motion just becomes slow motion in the game. So at the end of the day, when I was listening to what you were saying and what I agree with, I can't give credit to any specific person, but I know I've heard it and thought it. And that is that if you have to drill down deep to figure out whether something's a penalty or not, you've already wasted too much time. I think the one thing that they do, and I think it's important, that if there's any question as to whether the call is right or wrong, they should just assume the official's right. That's just my way of thinking, that's what you have to do, because it does one thing that's very important. It doesn't slow the game down. The more you drill down, we've seen it. Glenn, you've been in the booth, and we watch 15 different angles twice to determine whether a play was a play, and then we're questioning the official. Have we not figured out yet the official did a pretty good job because he did it in a split second as opposed to 10 minutes of looking at replays?
Yeah, and yeah, you know, and Frank, it's a great point, because we should also allow our officials to make mistakes and
Absolutely.
not just lose and not lose our minds because they maybe got a call wrong. I just I think we've gone too far into the sort of modern electronic look at everything. And to your point on slow motion, if you have to go into slow motion, we are now getting into the realm of very soft calls in the most um, you know, physical sport in the world. Football, like, you know, like boxing, is one of the most physical sports you can ever watch and see and play. And now when you start to slow something down to super slow mo and show that there was a little bit of a grab on a shirt or an arm, or a little bit of a push from a receiver, you're taking away the you know what the real facts are on the field, which is we're allowed to do that. You're allowed to fight for body position. I've said on the air a couple of times when I've seen pass interference, and it's not because I'm a former DB. Honestly, it's not. If it goes the other way, it's fine too. But I've said many times that sometimes I think there's more physicality under the basket in a basketball game when two guys are fighting for a rebound than there's allowed to happen on a football field. And I think we're going way too far if we're saying any little bump or push or you know, you're allowed to hand fight. In the rules, you're allowed to hand fight with the receiver and DB. And yet when you slow it down to super slow mo, that hand fighting now all of a sudden looks like it's holding. But it's not holding. If you run it in normal motion, it's just a tap. And that's where it gets distorted. And that's why in the replay center, they don't even use super slow mo to make
Good.
their decisions. Yeah.
I'm against it too. Go ahead, David.
Well, I mean, Glenn, you remember last year, it was like near the end of August, there was that big announcement that the CFL made talking about the command center refocusing on the clear and obvious principle. And because like there was just so much going on with the command center, they just needed to refine that. But it also feels like to me like it's never going to be perfect. So, and I think that's probably the trouble I think leagues get into is they try too hard to be perfect, rather than, you know what, human error happens, because it is still happening. Like, and that's the part to me is just like, I would rather it come down, when it's an important part of the game. If you can easily detect it, you got to give yourself like almost like a buffer period. If you can easily detect it, go ahead. If it's something that's going to take you 10, 15 minutes to figure out, it gets rid of that whole clear and obvious principle. Like there was the one game, I think was it Edmonton and Hamilton, where there was a review at in the final moments, and it kind of took out the air out of that game. And I get it. You want to make sure the calls are being done right, but you also don't want the games, how the game is being played to be impacted that much, because you're trying so hard to find something that might just not be that easy to find.
The game's like a football.
Yeah.
You can't deflate it.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right, and this is the concern I have, because I'll take it even further, David, than you want to going to next year. I hope they start to eliminate penalties that are challengeable. Like we shouldn't be challenging no yards. I mean, no yards. If a no yards penalty causes you to lose a game, then you don't have a good team. Okay. So it's not a penalty that we should stop the game for and challenge and have a coach throw his flag, and then they have to go to the command center, and then they have to talk about it, and then they have to go look at it, and then they have to, get out a measuring device or whatever they're doing to see if it's 5 yards or not. I just think some of these penalties that we're now looking at to challenge are slowing the game down. I mean, look, the new commissioner of the CFL is proposing and will change the way that the game is timed. So it goes from that 20-second clock where the official doesn't blow in the 20-second clock until he's ready, until he stands over the ball, until he's ready, and both teams have made substitutions. And that's what they want to eliminate, is the variability in there, that there's some refs it's different, some games it's different, and sometimes depending on where they are on the sidelines it's different. So they want to get that standardized, so it's going to be 35 seconds, and it starts right after the previous play ends. But if we're doing that, and the reason for doing that is to have increased game flow, then we have to look at the replay center. I mean, you cannot be putting game flow as a priority to a point of a rule change in timing if you're not going to go to the replay center and say, guys, we can't stop the game for 2.5 minutes while you go over the rule book. There is no way we can be doing that. And from a TV perspective, guys, now you got me fired up.
Right. Go ahead.
From a TV perspective, it kills our show. It kills our show. And we're getting going. We're talking about plays, we're showing replays, we're highlighting the players and the great athletes on the field, and everything comes to a stop because we're in the replay center because some coach challenged no yards in the second quarter. Like, come on. It's gone too far. It's just gone too far.
I had a math teacher that taught us something, a point of perfection, right? I think that's what it was. I'm so old now and I don't remember the lesson, but it's a lesson that comes to my mind. He told us, he said, okay, I want you to go half the distance to the wall. I want you to go half the distance to the wall. I want you to go half the distance to the wall. Are you there yet? You'll never end up there. And that's a fool's errand if you think you're going to get perfect calls in a game. And when you start chasing that, the byproduct is how long it takes to reach a perfection. So to your point, I totally agree with you, Glenn, not because you're so important, but because your point is important. I really appreciate the fact that what you're talking about is the flow of the game has importance. How the game plays is important. And David, you said the same thing. So there has to be this balance where, okay, we want to get the rules right, but we also don't want to delay the game. And at the end of the day, you've got officials. If you can't figure it out, there should be I don't know if they've decided to do it, whether they should decide if the replay people can't come up with a definitive answer in, let's say, a minute and a half, 2 minutes. If they don't have access to what they need to see in that 2 minutes. If they can't see anything wrong, because the whole point of these replays are egregious misses in a game that fans and everybody gets upset with. I want to remind people again, this whole thing happened because Montreal didn't make the playoffs one year, or what did they lose in the playoffs to Hamilton because there was a pass interference call that was missed, and everybody talked about it in the offseason and talked about, we can't have this happen again. And what happens is, in a rush, like I said, to do something good, you can go halfway to the wall a lot, but it'll take you too long and you'll never get to the wall. So you have to decide how close to the wall you want to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't think perfect is possible, guys. Perfect is a unicorn. There's no such thing. Not in the game and not in life. So I think if that's what we're striving for, it's just like
It
you
ain't
said,
gonna work.
it's not going to happen. Yeah. So but I do know that, what they're trying to do is take the standard of the rule, and the guys in the command center, replay center, they are experts in the rules. And so they want to take the standard and then apply the video with 2 or 3 different angles than the on-field official didn't see, and then apply the standard of the rule to what they're seeing, and then they're trying to get it as close to right as you can. But again, I've sat in those rooms where half the coaches said yes and half the coaches said no after seeing all the angles. So we need to keep that in mind when we're talking. And here's the other one, guys, and we, I know player safety is super important, and we need to continue to keep moving towards making the game as safe as possible always. However, when you're taking 2 or 3 minutes, which by the way on a TV show is
A
eternity,
lifetime.
is
Yeah.
like forever.
Eternity.
Yes, but if you're taking 2 or 3 minutes to look at a player's safety issue, like was it a roughing the passer call that was missed on the field? So let's say it was an egregious roughing the passer that was missed on the field. I'm not sure that helps the player who got hit in a player safety manner. I mean, yes, it might get the penalty that they missed, but it doesn't affect the safety of the player. The act has already happened. So again, I just hope that we clearly define why we're doing what we're doing now, including considering game flow as a big deterrent to more replay involvement, and then analyze everything that is challengeable and say, does this need to be challengeable? Are we doing it for the right reason? Because player safety on a penalty for roughing the passer is irrelevant. The passer still got hit. So yeah, you're tacking on 15 or 25 yards, but he still got hit. So he's already hurt if he got hurt on the hit. It didn't help him. So let's not use that as a player safety thing. If we need to do it and it's clear and obvious, okay, I think that there's another explanation, another reason that's more relevant.
Glenn, let me take your point and see if I can wrestle it to the ground. The point is that when it comes to player safety, there has to be a lot of thought. There has to be a lot of time taken to determine what improves player safety. So it's made to not be discussed during the game. It's an after game issue. And if an incident happens, if you're asking me, what's the deterrent to a player committing these kinds of fouls? I say it isn't necessarily like the 25-yard penalty that can really hurt a team. I get that. It's true. There is a punishment. But if you really want to focus in on the player who's doing the deed, then there has to be a conversation later. And that's when they can drill down on the player, his reputation. How many times, like I believe these $5,000 fines are awesome. Great. But I do believe that if players get the third like I'm a bit of a soccer fan. I'm sorry. I consider those yellow cards, and they should figure out what a red card is. Because if a player is consistently doing $5,000 fine actions, then there's something there that needs to be. He needs to be in a place where he understands that if you play this way, you're gonna get punished. And then if he does it 3 times, I would suspend him for a game. End of story. Because the money is the problem. They can't punish him any more than that. The league has an agreement with the CFLPA, and then the CFLPA and the league have to understand: are we into player safety? Then, if it's something so egregious, then there needs to be serious. To your point about when it comes to player safety, that's something aside from the game, in my opinion. All that I said is just that. That's all I'm boiling it down to.
Yeah, the player safety angle is a PA big time involvement. The PA, as
Oh,
you mentioned, has a big time involvement there, and in fact, I think that could be extended. If we're just uh, talking about ideas and thoughts that have happened over the last 10 years or so. To me, the Players Association could do some self governing here, and when they analyze a terrible hit, a bad hit, a cheap shot, however you want to call it, when they take a look at that tape, they're often defending the guy who's been suspended, and almost never defending the guy who's lying on the turf hurt. And my point would be that the PA has their own fine system, and they step in and say, yeah, we have a committee that of former players that saw the hit, and we thought it was worth a fine, and maybe that fine goes back into the CFLPA pot, or maybe it goes to a charity. I'm not sure, but I just think there's this, when it comes to player safety, well, the bigger picture is we need to expand the rosters. That will help in the player safety department more than anything else. Expand the rosters so we have independent special teams. That's to me the most important aspect. But as the system we have now, the player safety angle is like you said, Frank, post game, when we're using it as reasons to change replay and in-game penalties. I think we're misleading people there. I think that's not a player safety thing. The player's already been hit, but we can change the process after the fact, and it's different. It's separate from the replay center.
David, the CFLPA on its own. I know how you feel about this, so I'm going to pull it out of you. The CFLPA is it's conflicted, and to Glenn's point, he's 100% right. They usually defend the player who's going to pay the fine, because I think they're wired to keep as much money as they can in the player's pocket. So by default, they end up not. I don't think they're intentionally not protecting the player. I think they're wired to protect the player's salary and the money that they make. Fair, or your take on it?
I mean, there's obviously a bit of that goes into, well, I mean, player fines are the only fines we hear about too, right? Because coaches and GMs, we don't hear about those fines because it's not mandated by the league to announce those. But I think when it comes to the PA, like these players all understand what's, they're not making the millions of dollars that NFL players make. Like when you're taking out a player, like I think of like I'm trying to think of a good example. Like when Marino took out, was that when he took out Collaros? Was it?
I think it. No. Or was it I think it was Collaros.
Right. That was one of those few months where like players were pretty much unanimous in saying like that you got to throw the book at this guy, right?
McLeod Bethel Thompson was the loudest.
Right. We don't hear like that. You don't hear about too much because for the most part, players have the respect for each other. Like I think the CFL is one of those like the few leagues where you don't really have those issues as much because there is a big respect for each player, and a lot of players are on a level field in a lot of ways, right? So I feel like maybe that's just something that within the CFLPA they've all determined like this is not something we need to really be too concerned about because like yeah, fines happen. We're seeing them, every week, but they're not anything. I would say anything egregious, right? Other than maybe a couple of head contact plays or unsportsmanlike plays, but for the most part, CFL has been pretty disciplined. And I think that's something that they can hold their heads up high. I think the CFL players should be should hold their heads up high in that regard as well.
Glenn, take this home for us. You'll have the last word on this, and we'll move on to the playoffs.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't think for a second that the PA doesn't protect an injured player. I mean, they are going to do their best to make sure they get the best medical treatment and they're taken care of. And that is in the last probably 7 or 8 years, at least at the beginning of this new bargaining agreement deal they have, they that extends beyond their playing days. So if you're hurt and you still need rehab for 2 years after, I'm not sure the exact rules on it, but I know it goes and extends beyond your playing days. So I'm not suggesting they don't protect an injured player, but I think in the fine system, the PA can be, let's just say as a starter, they're public about the fact that it was a cheap shot and the player was wrong. And the decision he made on that hit was the wrong decision, and the PA is behind the league in the whatever the penalty is, whether it's a fine or a suspension. I'd like to hear the PA be vocal in that regard and say we have our own committee that looked at the hit, and that was an illegal hit.
Mm-hmm.
So the 1 game suspension for X player is justified. Excellent. Let's move on.
I don't want to leave anybody with the impression that I'll speak for myself that I'm picking on the CFLPA. What I will say is that every players association has the same challenge where they look like there's equity between the victim and the perpetrator. Every league has that. Every league has a players association that comes down looking like they're favoring or not wanting to punish the perpetrator. That's all I'm going to say about that. I promised Glenn would have the last say. Now I want you to have the first say on the playoffs are coming. Our favorite time of the year in the Canadian Football League. We're down to that point where if you win 2 games, you've got yourself a great opportunity in the Grey Cup. If you're not leading the division, but if you are, you only have to win 2 games, the one at the end. So this is an important time of the year for Canadian Football League fans. And I'd like to start, Glenn, by asking you, who are the teams that surprised you successfully and why?
Well, Calgary's top of that list to me. I knew Calgary would be better than they were last year, but I didn't think they'd be fighting for second place in the league better. And the way they started the season, I mean, we were talking about VA as an MOP candidate early on in the year. I think they started 7-2 or 7-3 in the first half of the season. And it was a game in Montreal against Montreal where Vernon got hit and got pretty banged up in that game, and then they went on that 4 game losing streak, and sort of things settled out for him. But I'm pleasantly surprised. I think Calgary fans. I think if you were to get an honest answer out of Coach Dickinson, he would tell you that this team, for how young they are, they're the youngest team in the league with more rookies than any other team, and their new quarterback, and in some cases new coaching staffs, things like that, new coaches in some spots, Mark Killam leaving and all of those things. Um, you're looking at a team that can contend, that could on any given day could beat any team. And I think even if they don't win a playoff game, massive improvement from last year, and the arrow is heading in the right direction for Calgary. So that's my biggest um I don't know, positive surprise, I guess. um when I think about Winnipeg and their inconsistency, and I'm sort of staying in the West right now. Their inconsistency is a surprise. I'm you can't be on top forever, but they've been very inconsistent. At times they look like they don't belong in the playoffs, and at times you see glimpses of a team that's been to the Grey Cup 5 straight years in a row. So it's really hard to figure what they are and what they'll look like in the playoffs. And then Ottawa not making it, that was a bigger drop than I expected. I think now, after watching this season, and I really like the guy, so I'm cheering for him to do well. Drew Brown, I think the question is Drew Brown going to be a franchise guy? And they've got to find that answer quickly.
Yeah, they definitely do. Like for me, I look at this year. Frank and I were in the airport in line waiting to get through security. There's great there's Dave Dickinson right there. We're just like, Dave, like, where do you see this thing going for you guys? Because obviously it was a down year for Calgary, and he did not
Hmm.
appear to be a coach GM that was looking at his team as a Grey Cup caliber roster. But I give them all the credit in the world because they've, as you said, they've been the biggest surprise to me. But they've also been at times the greatest surprise, but also like, are we sure we can trust them just yet? Because there's been some performances that have had me kind of take a step back and wonder, are they ready yet? Because there's been those they've had a true roller coaster season, that's for sure.
But you know what? If you're in training camp, and we talked to some people in Calgary, some very influential reporting type guys in Calgary, they felt from the beginning that this team might do some good stuff. We had them on the air here, David. That there might be some good stuff going on here. But still, if you were a Calgary fan and somebody said to you before the season started, you're going to fight for first place. You're going to fight for, at the very least, a home game in the Canadian Football League. You can't tell me those Calgary fans wouldn't be excited. I always enjoy using that. It's like with the Blue Jays. How many people thought the Blue Jays were going to be in the World Series? Be grateful for that. That just tells you that the Calgary fans had a nice adventure to get to where they are. They had a happy season. So for me, they're a positive because their fans were given a happy season. That's what I want for every Canadian Football League team and their fans. I want them to have a happy season. Your point with Ottawa, and David and I always, honest to goodness, Glenn, it's with sadness that we take note of what Ottawa's been doing the past years, because we've been sold not only on Drew Brown, even before that. The way the team was put together, the years it was put together, and we actually thought, this might be the year where the other Eastern teams got to worry about making the playoffs. And something happens. I know it's injuries to quarterbacks. I know it's stuff like that. But I think the worst thing that I could say, and I apologize for saying it, the team has to have a plan. And for some reason, it doesn't look like it's getting executed. That's the problem. That I just think they lack the kind of leadership, and it can come from the field too. We've learned that if you have the right guys on the field, on defense or offense, they can help make the team play better. They lack leadership, and they have yet to find somebody. They've had whispers of leadership, but they've lacked that. We've seen every great team in the Canadian Football League has captains, not just with the C like in hockey, guys that lead their team. And that's what I think Ottawa lacks. And they've got to find the leadership that they need to be successful. Executing a good plan. That's the other problem. You're not sure the plan was good either.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not saying that Drew Brown, I wouldn't give up on him, but that position is where that leadership can start. I mean, if your quarterback has got to give you hope. And that's not just the guys on offense. It's got your quarterback, you got to believe that he can get it done. I'm not saying Drew can't. He had another injury plagued season, so that he was having trouble staying on the field, which is another reason that you have to ask that question. And again, sometimes injuries are just bad luck, but you have to ask the question, like, we need a guy that can lead this team, that everybody in the organization is going to say, yep, he can be a championship guy. I mean, we saw the difference in the contrast, and I'm not giving up on Trey Ford for a second, but we saw
Well,
the contrast in Edmonton when they changed quarterbacks, and how different that team played under Cody Fajardo. I mean, I don't know where it leaves Trey Ford for next year. And I hope that he gets another opportunity somewhere if it's not Edmonton. But we saw a big difference in that entire team when they made a quarterback change.
That's the perfect sample. If you want to understand how important a quarterback is and how relevant they are, that is the best example you can have for it.
Yeah, I'm very curious. With Trey Ford, like I just think that there's a talent there. We've seen flashes of it, but it just feels like he needs the right coaching. Maybe I don't know if it's a coaching thing. I don't know if it's just the assistance thing. I'm obviously not a player. I don't know particularly about quarterbacks, but like we have seen time and time again where quarterbacks have been kind of cast aside a bit, but then they get into a better situation and voila, they're back to being, you know, either back to being what they're supposed to be or they found something within themselves. We've seen it time and time again in the CFL. I mean, Cody Fajardo is probably a good example of it, right? So many years as a backup third quarterback, he finally gets his opportunity and he's in the right system, and lo and behold, he's been a starter, for the good majority of the years.
I
And a guy who
Go ahead.
No,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead. Go
sorry,
ahead. No,
sorry,
go
Frank,
ahead.
and
Go
just a
ahead.
guy,
Go ahead.
a guy who, a guy in Cody who took the Montreal Alouettes to the Grey Cup and won it. Against a very good Winnipeg football team that year, down to the final few seconds. So, he's proven that he can do that. What with Trey Ford, just one final word on Trey. I've not seen in my time in broadcasting a quarterback with that type of elusiveness, that type of escapability. Doug Flutie, I played against, was probably as close as it comes, but athletically, Trey is he's a unicorn. He's a special guy. And I hope that he evolves in a big way because he's been sitting in the room with Cody Fajardo all season long. He watched how he handled when he was the backup, and he watched how he handled when he was the starter. And I guarantee you, nothing changed. That Cody was the same professional, no matter what his role on the team was. So I hope that the next team, if it's not Edmonton, and maybe it will be, but if it's not, Trey Ford probably has to start at the bottom again and work his way back up the mountain to get to that starting spot. But I hope he's learned a ton from Cody on just how to lead, how to be a pro. And I'm not saying he wasn't. It just it's an evolution. And he's a young guy with a gifted athleticism. And the next team that gives him a chance might get a much more well-rounded quarterback with still that athletic ability.
I think the problem with him, and I don't mean this in a mean spirited way, but I think his biggest problem is his focus. I've heard things about how he practices, and these are just rumors, but at the end of the day, he has to want it, and I just don't see his. How can I explain this? Like when you see Fajardo out there, when you see people like Ricky Ray, or you see even, I'll give you I'll switch from Trey Ford. We'll switch from Trey Ford. We'll go to Bo Levi Mitchell. Now, Bo Levi Mitchell was in Calgary. He was dispensed with because they felt they had a better opportunity, at quarterback. So they let him go to Hamilton. Hamilton didn't do well with him at first. He had a couple of tough years. To David's point, now all of a sudden they bring in Scott Milanovich, who's a quarterback whisperer. And we all know, and no one can deny, you cannot deny the talent that Bo Levi Mitchell has. You can't deny his ability to throw. Yes, when he was in Calgary, he had problems with his arms and he had injuries. He went to Hamilton, where I joked with the Hamilton manager and I said, he'll work for you guys because Hamilton has always these quarterbacks that played somewhere and they fell apart, and all of a sudden they come to Hamilton and they're superstars. You got one. And they laughed at me, and because I was being sincere, they thought I was being sarcastic. I was actually, and David heard me talk about this. So to David's point, that's a mix of a guy creating a plan to be executed and a guy that can execute it. It is a bit like a train. I don't agree 100% with you, Glenn, that a quarterback on his own can make it all happen. I'm a little more towards what David was saying, that they need an opportunity to show what they can do. But to your point with Trey Ford, I guess what I'm trying to say is he doesn't know how to capture the opportunity. It's there for him. They signed him. They treated him like a number one quarterback, and he didn't grab it. He has to grab the opportunity. And I'm not saying that. I hope it doesn't come across as a mean way.
No, I don't think it does. And I would agree with you on the coordinator, the offensive coordinator being in sync with his starting quarterback. And it took a full year for Bo to figure out Scott Milanovich's system and for Scott to figure out what Bo did well and what he didn't do well when he had him in the building. In fact, Bo got cut last year
That's right.
trying to figure out Scott's system. So, where Scott Milenovich and Bo are now are just in sync and ready to go. So yeah, I think the next offensive coordinator, whomever that is for Trey Ford, needs to design an offense that fits his skill set. And then Trey needs to grab that opportunity and run with it and be consistent and understand about protecting the ball and knowing when it's a crucial second down and long that you have to give your defense a rest, even if it's in the second quarter. Those are game management decisions and game urgency decisions that good quarterbacks get. They understand and they know.
Fajardo, a great teacher in that regard. That's Fajardo's strength. And if Trey Ford, to your point, if he was paying attention all this time, he learned something important that'll make him a great quarterback. Not just a good quarterback, a great quarterback.
Yeah, I hope so. I also, you guys know I wave the Canadian flag as much as I can. And Trey being Canadian and a U Sports guy, I really hope that, I really enjoy watching Nathan Rourke go to work. I think, he's a nominee for outstanding player. I think it's between he and Bo, to be honest. And that's with all due respect to Trevor Harris, who probably should be in the conversation too. But, I watch Nathan. I think we better get used to him as long as he stays healthy. We should get used to him being the nominee for outstanding player. He's playing at a different level, averaging well over 300 yards passing a game in the last month and a half.
David?
Yeah, I'm hoping look at when Nathan Rourke came back to the league, and it wasn't a seamless return for him, right? And look what difference a year makes now for him. Like, he's been arguably, he's proven to me he's well deserving to be the MOP this year. And in a lot of ways, I'm sure a lot of people are going to say, can he take this Lions team to the playoffs and take them through to the Grey Cup? After last year it didn't work out, and they really wanted it to work out because it was in their own building. So, bit of the redemption arc for Nathan Rourke is certainly a big one, and I'm hoping that a player like Trey Ford can see that and say, okay, what can I do to get to that? Like, I hope he's motivated to say, how can I put myself with that conversation with Nathan Rourke?
Nathan Rourke needed a big reset button after coming back in the NFL.
Yeah, and remember that most players do actually that go down there. I think there's a transition period, but there was also the issue with Vernon Adams in BC at the time, and just the politics of that. But Trey Ford is a different style quarterback than Nathan, and Nathan has a new coordinator again, right? So to your point, Frank, when you have to your coordinator and your quarterback, and that's often why they put a quarterback coach in the middle of that relationship, so that quarterback coach can be just working with the quarterback on fundamentals and be his number one cheerleader, and the offensive coordinator is trying to mold him into understanding what he's trying to see, but also helping, designing a system that best suits his skill set. And, Rourke will tell you now that Buck Pierce has been uh, just fantastic in that regard for him. He thinks he and Buck Pierce see the game the exact same way. And when you get that combination between OC and quarterback, you got something.
Grey Cup. Who do you see as the odds-on favorites, Glenn?
Frank, I don't do predictions.
I know, but I had to try. I had to try. I couldn't resist.
That was a very good try, though. It's a
I
very
just
good
thought I'd
try.
slip it in there.
I think to take this full circle, and I got to run here pretty soon, but
I
to
know.
take this full circle, I would say that, back to the opening of our conversation when we talked about the parity, especially in the West, but you can make an argument that Montreal's the best team with Davis Alexander, that Montreal's the best team in the league. You can make that argument. Just records aside for a second.
Mhm.
You look at their defense at times, they are absolutely dominant. So, when you look at the playoff teams, and the inconsistency in Winnipeg doesn't mean that in the playoffs they can't find that magic that got them there the 5 times in a row. I just think we are looking at an any given Sunday type of playoff scenario. Buckle up, get ready. And by the way,
Anybody.
by the time the playoffs kick off, the World Series will be over, so there will be no conflict in, in
Yeah,
watching
absolutely.
watching games. You'll be able to watch football.
Well, for us Toronto fans, we can switch to Toronto as far as the Blue Jays are concerned. To your point, I want to make sure that what you said resonates, and how I'll do that is I'll say this: every team that's in the playoffs could win the Grey Cup, hands down. That's not me stretching anything. And I'll add another qualifier: if Edmonton had made the playoffs, they could have won the Grey Cup with Cody Fajardo in it. This was one of the most incredible seasons the Canadian Football League has had, to David's point, where there's been this equality, this equity within the game, and every Canadian Football League fan that's sitting at home, of course, except for Toronto, Ottawa fans, could sit there and go, we had a chance to win the Grey Cup. So that's a good thing. David, you the second last word, and then we'll go to the guest.
Yeah, no, I think Glenn, I'm glad you didn't fall for Frank's trap. That's a good. Frank's usually good at trying to throw those out there. But yeah, no, I think it's going to be. It could be one of the more unpredictable years for the Grey Cup. Like, obviously, we always go into this saying, we expect this team to win, and it doesn't happen. But I think because there's more teams that feel like they have a real legitimate shot, not just a shot, a legitimate shot, it's going to make it a lot more competitive through these divisional and divisional and division rounds. It's going to be incredible.
Go ahead, Glenn.
Yeah, guys. Hey, first of all, I really appreciate being on the show. I really appreciate having our chat and talking. I'm sure I'll hear from the commissioner after some of the things I've said. He's going to give me a call and want to discuss a few issues. But that's okay too. Yeah, I agree with both of you on the teams in the playoffs. It's not going to be, it's when you look at it, it's going to be a lot of pick 'em games where you say you can make an argument for either team winning. And it'll be, that in the moment, who comes up with that great, is it Kenny Lawler with the great one-hander, or whoever makes those plays in the final 3 minutes of games, again, to go full circle. I think we do know this: there'll be a different Grey Cup champion than there was last year. We know that.
Yeah, that's positive. Well, for David Morassutti, Glen Suitor, I'm Candid Frank. Thank you for watching, everybody. And the final word is this: I hope, and I'm looking at all you out there that like the Canadian Football League, and I'm waggling my finger at you because we waggle in the Canadian Football League. You better be watching. There better be a lot more eyes watching the playoffs this year than have ever watched the playoffs ever before. And I promise you, if you do, you'll enjoy the game. So the CFL's here. The rules we talked about, the important thing that we talked about that I think is relevant is the competitive nature of the game and the talented Canadians that play the game along with very talented American players. It's the Canadian Football League. It's not going to change that much. But what should change is how much we pay attention to it. So thank you for watching. Enjoy whatever's going on with the baseball. I'll be watching too. And as Glenn said, there will be a little side eye going over to check out what's going on with the Blue Jays. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a great week. Enjoy the weekend of football. There'll be some really good games there. There'll be some anger in there and resentment that'll be played out this week more than trying to get to the Grey Cup. There'll be some bitter teams out there. Have a great one, everybody.